Hello, I'm Brian Keith from the University of Florida, and I'm co-presenting this talk with my UF colleague, Dr. Laurie Taylor, and we're pleased to be here. Our contact information is provided at the end, and as you'll see, we're hoping that you'll connect with us. And our topic is one that has been an area of interest for Laurie and I for some time, and an opportunity for collaboration. A big component of our talk will be focused on terminology and words, on names and nomenclature. We delivered this as a brief paper at the IDEAL conference in 2019. That's Inclusion, Diversity, Equity, Awareness in Libraries. And while there, the news of Toni Morrison's death was made public. We were reminded of Toni Morrison's Nobel Prize acceptance lecture. In it, she talks to us about language, and there's a couple of excerpts that are on this slide. The idea is that this so perfectly correlates with what we're going to be sharing with you today, and our thoughts and our focus, and the to have been at the IDEAL conference when the news of her passing, and to have this quote that so perfectly aligns with it. We wanted to share it again. If Laurie and I deliver this talk effectively, the connection of these quotes to our inquiry will be clear at the end. The Digital Library of the Caribbean, or dLOC, is an open access digital library of Caribbean and circum-Caribbean resources. It provides access and preservation for materials from archives, libraries, museums, and private collections. In today's talk, we are presenting dLOC as a model transnational digital collaborative community serving diverse populations and underrepresented voices. It also promotes bridge building, intersectionality, and inclusion. Accordingly, we feel dLOC serves as an important case study. This session examines dLOC's robust governance model, which created what we have labeled an uncolonized digital library. dLOC fosters diversity, equity, and inclusion. Partners support each other and their international community of scholars, students, and other peoples. dLOC surpasses many commercial collections in size and scope, totaling over 3.6 million pages. It includes oral histories, newspapers, official documents, ecological and economic data, maps, history, literature, poetry, musical expressions, videos, and artifacts. dLOC is a significant resource for teaching and research and cultural and community life. In dLOC, partner institutions define shared goals to support joint directed action and procedural justice. This is achieved through inclusive and distributed collection development with local level rights retention and collection development decision-making, with UF serving as content host, but with the authority of a regular partner, and digitization and metadata creation at the partner level. The result is a community of practice with increased capacity through collaboration. This is a case study in the positive disruptive capacity of technology at a time of need, as informed by an awareness of the historic colonization of library collections. It also represents an important departure from historic models.
And dLOC was born of ACURAL. ACURAL is the Association of Caribbean University Research and Institutional Libraries. ACURAL was founded in 1969 amidst fights and wins for independence by Caribbean peoples. Libraries created ACURAL, recognizing that people need access to the people's shared experience and past through media, and that creating, disseminating, and preserving culture and information should be done by the people, not the former colonizers. Experts in the Caribbean created ACURAL for local needs and those of huge diasporic populations. In 2004, ACURAL members founded dLOC. The then director of the University of the Virgin Islands Libraries, Judith Rogers, led the drive to create dLOC. She was responsible for supporting UVI students with campus locations on 3 islands, St. Croix, St. Thomas, and St. John, where the transport is by plane or by ferry. Judith Rogers and her Accuro colleagues recognized that any of their core communities span vast geographic areas, and that the internet, if wielded by community stakeholders for their needs with a platform designed by actual stakeholders, had the potential to better support immediate local needs and important needs for the broader communities. At the same time, partners throughout the region recognized that getting access to each other's materials was and would continue to be difficult. And we, all of the dLOC member institutions, all faced problems with preserving our materials because of our tropical climate. All of the partners also recognized that we needed to work together to identify, to share, and to preserve materials. So dLOC was launched because the community recognized the point where technology had evolved to where it was prevalent and it was predicted to become affordable and sustainable. At this point, technology could support stakeholder needs as defined by the communities. It should not be lost that librarians were at the fore of recognizing these needs and opportunities. So the technology was at the point of what E.F. Schumacher termed appropriate technology, where it could support local production from local resources for local use. Today, we also use the term minimal computing for appropriate technology to define the minimum required to do the work, with the computing power tied to the local needs and the actual use versus technology driving this behavior. In framing the dLOC model, we need to consider what we mean by a series of models and terms, including colonized libraries and library practices. Colonialism, according to the Merriam-Webster dictionary, is control by one power over a dependent area or people, or a policy advocating or based on such control. The latter part of the definition is the most relevant for cultural heritage institutions. The short definition belies the vast complexity of oppression and abuse with colonialism, which extends to mindsets and worldviews. The dynamics of colonialism apply to the treatment of less powerful groups within one country or across borders. Examples of heritage and information colonialism we have come to realize as a field are prevalent.
So in recognition of this legacy, many in libraries have sought to decolonize collections. Adel & Co. Explains that a post-colonial archive is one that examines and questions the impact and creation of imperialist ideology within the structure of the archive itself. It works towards assembling a collection of artifacts that have previously been underrepresented. Collection development and curation represents control over materials or resources from people and the organization of those materials according to the controlling entity's awareness, processes, goals, and biases. This is a form of colonialism in libraries and other cultural heritage institutions. These issues relate to the Society of American Archivists definition of the postcustodial theory of archives. In that, the idea that archivists will no longer physically acquire and maintain records, but they will provide management oversight for records that will remain in the custody of the record creators. Decolonizing efforts and perspectives are critical, but it is our view that none of these models quite or entirely fits dLOC. Our UF colleague, Dr. Margarita Vargas Betancourt, the Latin American and Caribbean Special Collections librarian, recently described the processes of colonialism represented in archives, and it has 3 parts. Empires used extensive record keeping to control their colonies. They used classificatory systems to ensure the hegemony of a small group of European colonists over indigenous African and Asian people. And the US also became an intellectual hegemonic power in part by collecting or removing Latin American and Caribbean cultural heritage. This is the application of desperate power to determine what is known, recorded, and preserved. In 2016, at the National Diversity in Libraries Conference, these descriptions of colonialism aligned perfectly with the remarks of the keynote speaker, Lakota Hardin. She described the destructive relationship between Native peoples and many of the cultural heritage institutions in the US. As she described, power inequalities have allowed even well-intended museums and libraries to disrupt these people's knowledge of and access to cultural heritage. Libraries and museums were allies in, or at least the instruments of, the political and legal dominance of one culture over others. Hardin provided a moving description of the traumatic results on her community. Our presentation title includes Un-Colonized because dLOC offers a different model, one not predicated on colonialism and so not organized based on decolonizing. However, to be clear, dLOC partners do have colonization and colonized records and are involved in decolonizing work. There are not clear or separate lines where colonialism is not present. It is in these collections. We are using the term uncolonial because we feel there needs to be a term for fair, equitable, and inclusive models like dLOC. But to be honest, we're not in love with the term uncolonial either. This presentation will conclude with an invitation for you to help us in thinking through better terms or ways of explaining, to mark something better than the historic models.
Yeah, so in creating dLOC, the founding partners put forward a model for a digital library that was polycentric and based on principles of shared governance, of collective action for the common good, and mutual aid. Partners would determine materials to digitize and work together to digitize materials for open access and long-term digital preservation, with materials shared openly online. Partners would be the ones to select materials from their own collections with no top-down mandates. Partners retain rights to their materials and grant permissions for the sharing of these materials for access and preservation. And further, partners emphasize that digitization and digital library work would be part of a larger mission for building the community and developing capacity for stakeholders. In establishing the model, partners created dLOC as a polycentric system based on mutual aid and generous thinking. As described by Eleanor Ostrom and Charlotte Hess, polycentric refers to systems and processes designed so that there will be no decentralized alternative, so that there will be decentralized alternative means of authority and rule and decision making. Margaret Heffernan described this collaborative pluralism as lots of different solutions applied and devised locally by those with an immediate and personal investment. Left to their own devices, individuals can create solutions together that are superior to those that are imposed by external authorities or managing agents. Heffernan describes Ostrom's assertion that the absolute requirement of trust, the sharing of resources, and denial of dominance, we thrive when we acknowledge our mutual dependency. So polycentrism, with the acknowledgement of mutual dependency, connects with the concept of mutual aid. These concepts are core to dLOC and the model that we're trying to describe. We can also think of it with the words of Dr. King. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. So mutual aid, generous thinking, and polycentrism are all necessary for recognizing and supporting needs related to inclusivity and intersectionality. Dr. Kimberly Williams Crenshaw established the term intersectionality and brought attention to the multiple systems of power and oppression. Inclusive and intersectional practices are necessary to confront and counter settler colonialism, which enacts violent assimilation and destruction that seeks to erase and reduce people. Intersectionality, inclusivity, polycentrism, mutual aid, generous thinking, all of these inform how we recognize ways of working and viewing the world that are counter to colonialism, which is predicated on competition, control, and oppression. These concepts are the center of the model that we're trying to work through to present to you today and discuss, that are critical to inclusive and equitable and diverse collections fostering greater awareness. So in this presentation, we've shared a variety of relevant terms and models and submitted a new term talking about uncolonized. We believe concepts are more relatable and powerful if named. Obviously, we have Toni Morrison talking about the value of words and naming. We also have Francis Bacon, William Shakespeare. But looking at all of this, decolonizing, for example, many of us implicitly immediately know what this means in terms of collections and in relation to our libraries. dLOC is a different model, and we want to be able to tell what we feel is an important story with the most appropriate and descriptive language possible, to find a name for the model, to be able to think with these ideas more clearly. So So to do that, we've talked about this in a number of different places, and we're again asking for your help today and thinking about how we make this real by naming it. We responded for this initial presentation thinking with Un-Colonized. I've explained a little bit about how we arrived at that name, and we feel that it falls short. For example, it still has colonized in the name, and that's not what we value or reflective of the origin of this multi-institutional digital library. This is also part of an ongoing series of conversations that are underway with libraries and other cultural heritage institutions. Part of this important conversation is with Kimberly Crenshaw and Jane Anderson talking about slow archives. It's a recent article, the 2019, and in it they explain that slow archives, it is in the slowing down that we can start to see modes of ethical archives that reflect accountability, engagement, relationality, and reciprocity that work alongside, within, and in opposition to settler structures and archival logics of displacement and disposition. They issue a call for slow archives, for frameworks that untangle and reposition archival practices as part of indigenous temporalities and territorialities, disrupting, disordering, and refuting standard archival practices and techniques. It's a really great article, so if anyone hasn't read it, we highly recommend it. However, thinking about that great article and the great term, really useful, slow archives, is slow archive the correct label for the dLOC model for a library created this way by a community of partners? We considered calling dLOC an intermutual digital library, with intermutual emphasizing connectedness, equitable partnerships, and mutual support. Is intermutual a powerful term for an important model? We're also not super thrilled with it. So we do have our Twitter information. We're going to move to a Google Doc to ask some of the questions to close. But first, we wanted to make sure you have our information to share that. Our slides are also online, and it includes the different references. So I'm going to stop sharing for just a second. To switch to the Google Doc with our series of questions. Brian, are you seeing the Google Doc?
I am. I'm sorry.
Okay.
I am seeing it. I should have given a thumbs up or something. We're in Zoom. I forget. And so the idea is that we're really hoping to have a conversation. I know that the intention was to record our presentation and not to record the Q&A. And I think this is the point at which the prepared remarks kind of conclude. And we're hoping for you guys to help us think through some of the terms and concepts we presented, those of you who joined us for this talk.